This is story of a 17-years-old girl who was daughter of a millionaire. She murdered 84-years-old woman. Kemi Adeola was just 17 when she stabbed former neighbor Anne Mendel 14 times in March 2005. She killed her as a dry run for her plan to kill a wealthy pensioner and steal her money. Boxer-turned-property tycoon Bola had provided a privileged upbringing for Kemi and her 3 sisters. The marriage of Mr. Adeola, who came here from Nigeria as a child, and Kemi's Barbados-born mother Mercuria, lasted barely 4 years and he had little contact during the children's upbringing. The couple produced 3 children and Mercuria has a 4th child from another relationship. In 1991 Bola split from wife Mercuria, giving her a £4 million settlement. The girls went to live with their mum and Kemi Adeola saw little of her father. Despite suggestions that Mrs. Adeola received a £4 million divorce settlement, she and her children led a shiftless life around the country, moving to a succession of homes in places including Cheltenham and Peterborough, frequently alienating neighbours. Neighbours said Kemi Adeola subjected residents to a reign of terror and racial harassment, abusing young children and even smearing excrement on windows. She was arrested for abusing one Asian neighbour. She gave a lot of trouble to one particular family. Once she lay in wait for the man, behind a bush and punched him in the face, breaking his nose. Other neighbours recall Mr. Adeola sometimes turning up in his Rolls-Royce to see his children, but the visits were brief and infrequent. At one property in Gloucestershire, Kemi killed the goldfish in a neighbour's pond and blamed a cat. The dysfunctional family moved into Elmcroft Road in Golders Green for several months, living next door to Mr. and Mrs. Mendel. Mrs. Mendel offered the hand of friendship to the girl who was to kill her, letting the teenager into her house after she locked herself out. Kemi ignored school and by the age of 15 had fallen into criminal habits. She began regularly shoplifting, often returning stolen items with an altered receipt to claim a cash refund. She became expert at altering receipts to secure refunds for stolen goods. The teenage killer briefly boarded at £23,000 a year Wycliffe College. The independent school at Stonehouse in the Cotswolds prides itself on its academic and sporting achievements, but Kemi only lasted a few months because of a row over who was paying her fees. Despite her expensive education, she left school with no qualifications, but with an all-consuming obsession for getting her hands on a fortune. She was not as adept as she thought, however, and after a string of convictions found herself facing a custodial sentence. Her self-obsession continued and she boasted to a sibling of her acting talents when being questioned by a youth worker. She told how she wept, mumbled, and arched her back to convince the woman of her innocence and vulnerability to try to limit her sentence. She overestimated her skill and ended up at Bulwood Hall Young Offenders Institute in Essex for 3 months. Kemi wrote an 18-page murder manual while she was serving a sentence for shoplifting, which was discovered during a cell search at Bulwood Hall, Essex. She wrote a murder manual, describing how she would kill a rich, elderly, and defenseless woman and steal her money. She hoped to get $3 million in total. During a routine cell search, staff unearthed her blueprint, entitled Prison and After, Making Life Again. It included a shopping list of sharp knives or butcher's knives, guns, drugs, and handcuffs, and logged in chilling detail plans to kill, dismember, and dispose of a victim in pursuit of £3 million. She imagined stalking an elderly woman in a wealthy area, possibly posing as a schoolgirl carrying out a questionnaire for homework. Run lightly and silently behind her and cover her mouth with a gloved hand, she wrote. Make her so scared she cooperates. Keep calm, composed and silent. She must cooperate or take a knife to her throat. Tell her, this is your only warning. However, she claimed it was the plot of a crime thriller she was writing. She described building a cling film tent and wrote graphically about disposing of the body. With your butcher's knife, remove her head. Wrap it in film to contain bleeding, detach limbs one by one. When confronted by psychiatrists and prison staff, Kemi insisted her notes were part of the draft for a novel. The report described her as a highly intelligent and sophisticated young person, who with good support should make a good recovery and engage in her A-level studies. A prison psychiatrist, who believed Kemi Adeola's lies that she had achieved 4 GCSE A grades, said it was a shame she had been jailed. Barnet Youth Offending Team said a psychiatric assessment carried out after the document was discovered did not indicate any concern that Miss Adeola would be predisposed in any way to this type of violence, nor was there any evidence of this type of violence in her past. A council monitoring team was set up to supervise her for 3 months after her release. But psychiatrists decided Kemi did not pose a risk and, a month after supervision expired, she struck. It was there that her thoughts, and writings, turned to murder. She adhered to virtually every word of her manual, stabbing the 84-year-old pensioner 14 times at her home in Golders Green, North London. After her release in November 2004, education was the last thing on Kemi's mind. She was reunited with her dad, who provided a flat for Kemi and a 16-year-old friend she had served alongside. But when Kemi's 3-month license period was up, she smashed up her father's office and moved into an £800 a month Hampstead flat. Later telling the court she paid the rent by working as a £500 a night escort. It is a completely legitimate and professional business. We earned up to £5,000 a week, she said. In March 2005, with her supervision at an end, Adeola turned her novel into horrific reality. In the hour that Mr. Mendel popped out to pick up air tickets for an overseas trip, the teenager struck, inflicting deep wounds to her victim's torso, right arm, and back with a blade at least 1 inch wide and 5 inch long. Well-spoken Kemi Adeola knifed 4 feet 10 inches Mrs. Mendel 14 times during a frenzied attack. Kemi may have disguised herself as a schoolgirl when she went to the Mendel's house. She threw away her bloodied clothes after the killing and might have got away with it but for a tiny speck of her DNA found on Mrs. Mendel's hand. Husband Leonard, 81, found her in blood-covered pajamas lying beneath a pile of coats in their hall. Kemi Adeola, who once lived next to the couple in Golders Green, North London, plotted a strikingly similar murder while serving 6 months for shoplifting. The elderly couple had been married for 50 years and lived a quiet, rewarding life. They had 2 children, and 14 grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Their son, appealing for help after the murder, said, "My mother spent every day of her week performing good deeds and charity work. She devoted her whole life to visiting the sick, helping friends and neighbors and bringing a smile to everyone she knew, even complete strangers." During her trial, Kemi Adeola, dressed in pinstripe suit, pink trainers, and spangly belt, appeared unmoved by the gravity of her crime, smiling and exchanging text messages during court recesses. 84-year-old Mrs. Mendel was not wealthy, but Adeola picked her as a soft target in a test run for her wicked scheme. She spied on the house until she saw Leonard leave, then cut the telephone wires and sneaked in. She had lied brazenly to police over DNA found on her victim, claiming she had visited Golders Green the day before the murder and the pensioner had scratched her hand as she helped her across the road. With the assistance of a 16-year-old friend, she then tried to construct an alibi. Detective Chief Inspector Steve Morris called her a callous and devious young woman, adding, "Her cold, calculated use of extreme violence beggars belief." Police believe more victims may have been in the pipeline and that the attack on Mrs. Mendel may have been a dry run for a wealthier target. If she had got away with this, then God knows what she might have done. She is very, very dangerous. Mr. Mendel described his wife as someone whose life was taken up with kindness and giving up of herself to others. The unjust end she met, having so much taken away in such an undeserving manner, left us in total shock. Mr. Adeola, 49, a former boxer who has remarried and lives in a £2 million Berkshire home, had briefly given his daughter a £140 a week job and free accommodation. The multimillionaire father disowned his sadistic teenage daughter after she was found guilty of knifing to death a frail 84-year-old woman. At first I couldn't accept that somebody with my blood in her veins could do this to anyone, but then I saw the evidence. She should rot in hell. And after the verdict her shocked dad Bola said, "What she did is evil. She is no longer my daughter. I will never see her again, and don't want her anywhere near me. I regret the day I ever met her mother. I thought nothing would surprise me, but I wasn't prepared for murder. When I saw Mrs. Mendel's picture I cried." She was convicted of murder and jailed for life at the Old Bailey in June 2006, with her minimum term set at 20 years.